All right, it says we're live, so I'm just going
Alive.
to give it a couple of seconds. Yeah. Okay. Hey guys, welcome back to my regular Wednesday night live stream. Today I have Kaj Andersson. He is you're a dual citizen, is that correct, of both Sweden and Australia?
Yeah, that is correct. I am a dual citizen, have been for about 20 years now. Got two passports, one for Sweden, one for Australia. So I've always
Mm.
hoped I could always do a bank or something in Australia and run off to Sweden and not get redeported back. It's
Well,
always something I
where do
can
your
do. Yes to
where
that.
do your allegiances lie? Because oftentimes people complain about Avi saying, "Oh, well, if Australia goes to shit, he can just go to Israel." Where do your allegiances lie, Kaj?
That's a very good question. It's been one that my political enemies have tried to get me on for on quite a few occasions. But I was born in Australia, just to clear this up.
Okay.
To a Swedish, to a Swedish dad and an Australian mum who has a Swedish grandfather. So I'm a little bit over half Swedish. But I do go to Sweden every couple of years and maintain those links with my family and friends over there. But my allegiances certainly lie first and foremost to Australia.
But at least
So
at least you can say that phrase. Some people with dual citizenship can't say that phrase, and you've just clarified my
oh,
my
clear that right up.
allegiance is with Australia.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
If Sweden plays Australia in tennis or in some sporting event, I always go for Australia. But if Sweden plays another country other than Australia, I always go
go for
for
Sweden.
Sweden. Yeah, so I think that's fair and reasonable.
I'm in a worse situation than you, my friend, because even
Mm.
though I am born and raised Australian and I don't have dual citizenship with Spain or Colombia,
Mm.
I never know who to go for. Like, of course, I always go for Australia. That's prime. But then if it's
Mm.
like Colombia versus Spain or something, I'm like, who do I go for?
If it's
It's
Spain, because in
difficult.
Colombia you can get shot for not supporting Colombia, but in Spain you're
Yeah,
lucky
that's
to
true.
know that guy that got done some time ago, the
Particularly in
goalkeeper.
soccer.
Yes, exactly. So good move.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll always go for Colombia because I have to. Say something in Swedish before we begin.
Well, to any Swedish people on the platform, hej allihopa. Jag hoppas ni mår bra, alla mår bra och att ni trivs när du tittar på det här programmet. Och ja, ha det så bra. Ha det gott. Hej då.
Ha det gott! Ha det gott!
Ha det gott. Ha det gott is basically, catch around. Take it easy.
Cool. Sounds good. All right. Well, just to clarify with everyone who's wondering, who's this fella? Who's this Kaj Andersson? Why is Dia interviewing him? Well, one, he's a friend, and two, we met originally about 2 years ago at one of Avi Yemeni's rallies. That's where our friendship began. You, your wife, and myself.
Mm.
And three, he's actually been behind the scenes of one of my videos, assisted me with a video called Australia's House Prices.
Mm.
And it was a very well received video and a very well researched video. And I couldn't have done that video by myself because everyone knows I'm not math smart. So I definitely needed the likes of a Swede. I'm just kidding. Just someone smart to help me.
We're very dry, very reserved, and good at research.
Definitely good at research. So he's been very political, and we've been political friends for quite a number of years now. And this is the first time I've had you on to interview you because I felt like this was a subject that no one's really touched on, except for maybe Paul Joseph Watson, maybe Daisy Cousins. No one's really made a video on Sweden or really delved into it that I've seen, at least in Australia. So I thought, why not ask a Swede and someone who is politically quite intelligent, and someone who considers himself both Swedish and Australian. So I want to know, what was Sweden before and what has it become? Is Trump right?
Yeah. Good evening. Yeah, no, good evening, Dia, and good evening to everybody on your platform and wherever you might be tonight. So Sweden, I guess, from a traditional point of view, Sweden has its tradition. It is a constitutional monarchy. which has been around since for 1,000 years, more or less, since the end of the Viking Age. So in Sweden, we've got traditional aspects of Swedish society that revolve around, things like a love of nature and the outdoors. The society is we're a very patient and orderly people. For example, we believe in queuing up and waiting our turn and following the numbering system when you're at the shops.
That's funny. That's good.
Just wait till our turn, and there's no shoving and pushing and shoving to get in front of other people. A very orderly society in that way. World leaders, of course, in things like environmental protection and recycling matters, in biodiversity and ecological matters as well. So, in many ways, we're sort of very much a very progressive society in that sense, from an intellectual perspective and civilizational perspective. We have our food norms and standards. We love our Swedish meatballs, our pickled herrings, pancakes, crayfish.
I've been to Sweden. I didn't have any of that. I didn't have any of that food.
No, well, that's pretty much sums up. We have a very particular local sort of culinary experience as well. Some traditional dates that predate Christian Sweden. Many of the cultural norms and traditions are based on a pagan background, like Valborg.
Oh, interesting.
That's right, because the pagans followed the summer solstice and winter solstice cycle.
That's right.
So the 30th of April is, for example, Valborg's night, where it sort of where we symbolizes the passing of winter into summer. And then in early June you have Midsummer, where we dance around the Mayflower tree and we call that a maypole. It's like a pole that's dressed up with.
Oh, I know what the maypole is. It's an old-fashioned dance around with strings.
Yeah, and they dress the pole up with flowers and birch tree branches and whatnot, and it sort of symbolizes the middle of summer or the coming of summer.
Yeah.
And then we've got, of course, Christmas at Yule. We call that Yule. Christmas is on the
Yuletide.
Yuletide, that's correct. And Yule, the silent J, Yule.
Yeah.
And that's on the 24th of December.
So everything you're describing is classic Sweden.
Yeah, that's right.
Has that evolved now? Has that evolved? Everything that you've described, the beauty and the culture and the preservation of all of that, has that morphed into something else because of all the stupid feminists in government? Because obviously now we know that Malmö, or however you pronounce it, is the #1 rape capital, beating out the Congo of Africa as the rape capital. So we now know that women ruling isn't particularly a great combination for a country. And so you've described something beautiful, but it's evolved into something quite dangerous. How would you describe that?
Well, I mean, on that point around regards to, like, for example, violence against women, / honor violence, honor-related violence, honor killings, it's a bit of a juxtaposition for the Swedish government to take. If it's strongly involved in feminist policy, the question has to be asked, of course, if it values gender and gender equality so highly, why does it import cultures and people who are so intolerant of gender and intolerant of women's rights?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
That's a juxtaposition that the Swedish government are struggling to try and contain, and you're seeing that public opinion is certainly starting to move against that particular development in Swedish society, and into the hands of those political entities that seek to address that issue and take it and address it permanently head on. So it's a bit of an anathema to gender politics if you invite into the country those people whom will never be respectful of your feminist platform and never want to understand and learn that what that platform stands for. It only works with people who are capable of understanding that platform from the beginning.
Did you see there was an advertisement going around in Sweden that others were commenting on, and the advertisement was all these different people speaking in Swedish saying, "Our country has changed. It is now time for us to embrace these new people, and we will change along with them." Basically, the way I took it was, we're not going to preserve what we have. We're going to continue to allow mass immigration. We're going to continue to allow Sweden to continually change. So just deal with it. And part of the way this feminist government that I referenced earlier is dealing with rape is by giving the migrants who are doing the rape, by taking away women's shelters and giving the migrants more, so that they will have less reason to want to rape. And then they're giving women, I think it's I forgot whether it was a whistle or, no, it was a bracelet. They're giving women a bracelet that says, "Please don't rape me," or something.
That was revolved around a number of music festivals that occurred.
Yes, that's right.
Have been occurring since 2015, 2016. Where in 2015, of course, we saw the arrival of about 165,000 people from the Syrian refugee crisis. Over the course of about 12 months, we saw the attempted integration of 165,000 Syrian nationals into Sweden's borders, it really begs the question of whether that was just. I mean, clearly it was a gesture of attempted gesture of generosity based on a misplaced ideal. But the reality on the ground is that it was an incredibly, it was sheer folly to a huge degree. And what you just said about those bracelets that were given out by the government,
ridiculous,
to young women who were attending music festivals, is an example of a government and a system in Sweden which has capitulated by simply believing that those type of virtue signalling type of measures are going to work against a number of people, or a large number of people who haven't got the capacity to control their own actions. You're coming from a conservative Islamic society and suddenly get sucked into a society as liberal as Sweden is. It's like setting, the fox amongst the chickens.
Yeah. And, sorry, everyone. My back is sore. I don't mean to look uncomfortable. Keep going.
No, that's okay.
Sorry.
So just give us a few cracks of the vertebrae. That'd be great.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry. I'm trying not to act like I'm in pain, but I am. I'm in pain. Sorry. Keep going.
Yeah. No. So that was a measure that's just was just astonishingly silly and misplaced. And 4 years on, or 2 years later, they had the general election in 2018, September 2018.
And what happened with that?
Well,
did they still, are the conservatives left? Does conservatism exist there? Even though I no longer identify as conservative, I still think that's the best option. Does the right exist there?
Yes. So in that election process, we saw the far right Swedish Democrats, which are an anti-mass migration movement, an anti-mass migration political party, gained significant percentages of votes, and to the point where in November last year, during a Politico poll in Sweden, they were polling at 25% of the primary vote. And so what we're seeing is that alone as a single entity political party, they're challenging, they're dominant, they're bigger than all other parties separately. So that's why the other parties who are all centrist in nature or centre left and who gained significantly to profit and maintain control and power based on the current status quo in Swedish society, they formed alliances to try to keep the Swedish Democrats out of parliament or out of power in Sweden. So that's where it is today. So we're hoping that in the next election cycle in 2022, we're hoping that the Swedish Democrats can win to a point where they can rule outright in Sweden, along with a number of other minor right-wing parties.
Let's get some men back into the government there, can we?
Yeah, well, yes, and or
That's so sexist of me.
Yeah, no, but
that's going to be a soundbite.
But it's just truth, reason, and evidence, and both men and women can partake in that logic and that philosophy. So it's happening. I mean, I was in Sweden last year for about a month and a half.
I remember you told me that.
That's right, and I kind of was talking to everyday Swedes, and I do like to go back and check the pulse of the Swedish people when I'm back over there, and conduct a bit of a vox pop on people's thoughts and opinions. And one thing that became quite prominent for me was that many people who had in the past castigated the Swedish Democrats were in fact quietly in support of that particular political movement, and were planning on voting for them in the next election cycle. And because the evidence is on the ground, it's actually happening now. It's too much. There's too much happening for the government and the media to hide. So it's becoming particularly and painfully obvious. It's a very inconvenient truth now in Sweden that what we're talking about is a reality, and it's certainly showing in the polls. And it will lead to the demise of the centre-left political establishment and the rise of a right-wing patriot / nationalist political establishment in Sweden.
How do you identify? Just in case my audience might want to ask that, but I'll ask you now so that I can avoid that question later popping up on the screen. If you don't mind, at the end of the last 20 minutes or half hour, I get the audience questions up. But do you identify as a white nationalist, a nationalist, a Swedish nationalist, an ethno-nationalist, a civic nationalist? What would you consider yourself?
Well, I mean, in nationalism to me is different in Europe than from Australia.
Okay.
In Europe, now the reason I say that is because in Europe constitutes hundreds and thousands of ancient tribes.
Vikings in your case.
Germanic tribes, the tribes of Spain and France, what we call modern day.
I don't know what my tribe is in Spain. What am I? What are the Spanish tribes?
Well, I mean, there were tribes. There were
rapists.
Pre and post Roman times. There were indigenous tribes all over Europe. Yes, the Vikings were part of the Germanic peoples, and you went down into the Gauls in France, and then you had various tribes that aligned along the Eastern European sides. Exactly right.
Yeah.
So these tribes they were European peoples, ancient people rooted into that continent's history and traditions and cultures. To be a nationalist in Europe right now, to take Sweden as an example, Europe is a white. Yeah, Europe is a. Go. I was going to say Europe is a white. The European continent is indigenously white. Right?
It is. There are varying complexions, like Albania or Bosnia, but you're technically right. Yes.
The Slavs in the east, and the Rus in the northeast, and then Western Europe, the Germanics, and it is a white continent.
Yes, it is.
And the tribes that occupied Europe were white from the beginning. So the term nationalism in the 21st century takes on a different meaning. Being a white nationalist or an ethno-nationalist is far more relevant in the European context than it is in, say, the US or Australia, which are colonies of the British Empire.
Yes, that's a good distinction. I wouldn't have thought that, because to me, a white nationalist is different to an ethno-nationalist. To me, a nationalist is different to. Sorry, I'm confusing myself. To me, an ethno-nationalist is different to a white nationalist, because an ethno-nationalist could be a Jewish person, a Sudanese person.
Right.
They're not going to be white nationalists because they're not white. But a white nationalist wants the preservation of their own people. But I hadn't considered what you just stated regarding the culture and the British colonization. So sorry, continue your point, because I'm interested in it.
Yes, and I mean, I think this is instructive for the audience that you can be a Sudanese nationalist, you can be a Jewish nationalist, you can be a Colombian nationalist, you can be a ethno-nationalist from anywhere in the world. I mean, the Chinese are certainly nationalists; they're ultra-nationalists, and they
are.
Back their civilization, their history and culture and society 110%. So it is that sense that it is the people that originally were inhabitants of that particular geographical zone. If they've always been there for thousands and thousands of years, as far back as we can see, then yes, you have a right to be an ethno or coloured nationalist from that part of the world, right?
Of course, yeah. But they all execute their ideology in a different way. Don't
yes,
you think?
yeah, of course they do, because their ideologies are a representation of their tribalism, all right, from that part of the world. So, I mean, in Australia, for example, I've always maintained as a nationalist that we, as white people who settled the country, not invaded but settled the country, you know, was before we settled the country, there was an indigenous population here.
Yes, there was, and there were pygmies. People
and
forget
prior to
about
that,
them.
there's an argument that there were another humanoid variety that occupied the continent.
There were Aboriginal midgets. If you look at the photos of them, they were Aboriginal looking, but they were midgets. Yeah. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, and I think that you know, that's way back. It probably doesn't have much relevance to the way forward.
No, it doesn't. I just felt like adding it.
I've always said that in Australia we have a pecking order in many ways. Sure. The indigenous people occupied this continent as a nomadic, you know, hunter-gatherer people, and the British powers settled the country. Didn't invade. I don't believe it was an invasion, because it wasn't a military force that invaded, but it was a settlement that put Australia on the map, and it's where we are today. And so, but I believe we need to pay homage to the original indigenous of this country, because
we can't be rude to them.
They were here first, and they had a bit of a rough time after we arrived and moved forward, and we're still working through those questions.
You're not part of the we. You're a Swede. I'm not part of the we. I'm Spanish.
Yeah, but I mean, as white Australians, we're part of the solution, not the problem. And
yes.
And as opposed to what the you know, those rat bags that were protesting the other day, calling for the abolish of Australia.
Invasion, yeah.
I mean, that's just. I mean, that means that they can be the first ones to go back to their European countries of origin if they want to, and let us fix up the problem that remains behind. Right? They're just a problem, not part of the solution. So, in many ways, there wasn't an indigenous person living in Sweden before the white people lived there. I mean, they were there from the very beginning, as the same in Germany and France and right through Central and Northern Europe. So it takes on a different meaning. So I'm not a white nationalist, because I understand that I can't.
I'm not a white nationalist.
I can't bring myself to go up to one of my non-white friends and hate them for the colour of their skin, and that's just outright. You know,
I think that's actually a point that the white nationalists hate. I think some of them are racist. Some white nationalists believe that they are the superior race, and I don't think that way. Even Blair Cottrell doesn't think that way. But they are white separatists. It doesn't mean you're automatically an asshole to another race to defend their position.
Take out that. Okay, I understand. You know, I mean, it's wrong to go. It's wrong to hate somebody for the color of their skin.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have to take that out of the equation.
My mum dealt with a bit of racism when she came here, because she looked different, she sounded different, and of course, that's a thing.
It's racism.
It was a thing.
Is bad. I mean, to call someone a black bastard is equal to calling someone a white bastard or a yellow bastard.
Sure.
It's
absolutely
the same thing, and there's no two ways about it. But in Australia, there's a pecking order, and the white settlers built the country from the bottom up.
Indeed.
And then waves of immigrants arrived here, mostly after World War II, starting with the Baltic immigrants and the Germanic immigrants that came out to work on the Snowy Hydro scheme. And then we had other waves of immigration, much of it unsuccessful.
Well, the Whitlam government was the government that permitted that basically got rid of the white Australia policy, and that all happened in 1973, I think. And it was yeah. And so by 1975 or 6, there was already a legislation. Sorry, someone has given me $10 to read this question out. So I don't know if it's it's to you.
I can see it. Yeah.
I'm just going to read it because the super chats, I read them unless they're like super rude or insulting. I usually read them. Alan B. Stud asks you, an ethno-nationalist. Australia was British and Aboriginal until the 60s. One tribe came to Australia, British. Australia was never a multi-racial country. I don't think you said it was. I don't know why he's saying that. But what about native Swedes, the Laps? Do you know what that means?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure what he means about the multiracial country part.
Yeah, you never insinuated that, so I don't know why he's even hinting at that.
In 2021, Alan, 2020, pardon me, Alan, we are a multiracial country. We have race. We are a multiracial country, whether one opposes that outcome or not. Well, we are a multiracial country. Multiracialism is certainly different from multiculturalism.
Absolutely.
Singapore's an example of a successful multiracial country.
But it's predominantly Asian still, even though Singapore is I think people think multiracial, cultural is the same thing, but it's not, because with multiracialism, at least you're attempting to keep the culture Australian or whatever, or what have you. But with multiculturalism, you're trying to join cultures, and that's just retarded.
Well, yeah, you're trying to supersede the dominant culture by giving other cultures an equal power base, which of course leads to social conflict, which is what we're seeing in Australia today.
Yes.
But what Alan mentioned about the Laps.
Who are the Laps? So they're obviously the natives. What did they look like? Were they white natives?
No. I mean, the Laps are a Eskimo people that probably share some similarities. Well, back
with the Canadian ones.
Yeah, with the Inuits and those that traverse across Greenland and northern Russia. They were basically involved in reindeer, harvesting reindeer for resources, and were a very small in absolute numbers, not absolute terms, but they were nomadic people that moved right across northern Norway, northern Sweden, northern Finland.
Okay, so they were nomads. Okay.
So they were nomads. So they similar to the Aboriginals in many ways, but certainly didn't come into conflict with the original tribes of the white tribes of Sweden.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's go back to Sweden. I think this is sort of related, what I'm about to say, but I'll make it Swedish with my example. I believe, and I know you're a Christian as well, I believe that Christianity has been severely corrupted. And I believe that Sweden was possibly at one time, obviously you said it was originally pagan, but I believe that it's the tenets of this country are very similar to the Australian tenets, which is, work hard, achieve, follow the laws, just basic things like that, West is best type ideals. But those get mixed up and Christianity gets corrupted. And so when Christianity gets corrupted, your country in turn gets corrupted. There was a story that I rarely read news stories that make me cry. Very rarely do I read a story and I start bawling. It doesn't happen very often. One story where that happened was a family of Christians in Sweden, Swedish people, family of Christians. They had their kids taken away from them for being Christian. And I don't know what happened, but something came over me and I started crying. And then I went down on my knees and I started praying and I said, dear God, please let this government give these kids back to these people. But they gave the kids away. And I don't know what's become of it. But my point in mentioning that is that they have elevated Islam so much. And the origins and the tenets of the foundation of Sweden to me is relatively Christian in nature. But they won't even allow a Christian family to teach their children about Christ because they consider it abuse. What are your thoughts on all that? I know that's a lot to unpack, but.
Well, I think that it probably is resultant from the fact that Sweden is probably the Western world's most secular society, and increasingly godless.
Yeah, it's very sad.
So but
the God that they elevate is the shitty God. Allah is not a good God.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's it leaves a vacuum, doesn't it? For when a Western society becomes godless, it leaves a vacuum for other religions or ideologies to fill that vacuum and assert itself. And I think this is what I wanted to get into, Dia.
Yeah, go ahead.
In regards to
just ignore my movements.
Yeah, that's I'm concerned about that. You stretching that back out there.
Sorry, I don't know why I'm in so much pain. I have to go to the chiropractor tomorrow.
Doing this discussion on a foam roller.
Sorry, this is so unprofessional. I'm so sorry. I'm still on the topic. I'm interested to hear how you unpack all of that, because that story, having your kids taken away from you because you're a Christian, and there's no context to that story. That's literally the reason. Anyway, sorry, keep going.
Probably to do very much with the state, appeasing, trying its best to appease, the rising number of Muslims in Sweden. Sweden has about 10 million people, the population of 10 million, 800,000 of which are Muslims, followers of the Islamic ideology. It's 8.1%.
Yeah, I did a video on it. Yeah.
I think that at the end of I think that we can agree on reason, truth, and evidence that the more Muslims enter or the more Muslims make up the overall population of a Western civilization, you're going to have some pushback. You're going to have some enforced changes. You're going to have some assertion of their cultural standards applied upon your country and upon your system. The example I wanted to quote or wanted to cite was of in 2018, there was a Swedish Muslim woman by the name of Farah Al-Hajj, and she went to a
curly hair.
No, she's a Swedish Muslim woman.
Oh, sorry, Swedish, as in blonde hair, white woman. Okay, go ahead.
No, I think she was of Middle Eastern descent, but born in Sweden.
Gotcha.
And she went to a job interview for a position of a translator or an interpreter with a company, and at that interview, she refused to shake the hands of her male interviewer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And she subsequently didn't get the job, and she took via the Swedish Labour Court, she took the company to court, and they found in favour of her complaint.
Oh, sweet God.
And awarded the company to pay her about $6,500 Australian dollars in compensation.
Because of all the damages, because she would have been really damaged for not shaking that man's hand.
Well, I think this is a soft but critical example of people of the Islamic faith asserting their cultural norms and customs, onto as they grow in number, they become emboldened to assert themselves more and more, and that's a good example of a situation like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that backing it a little bit back, Dia, to why it's arrived at this point in time. Really, quite honestly, the origins of all this started with the establishment of the welfare state in Sweden, right?
Oh, okay, that's new information for me. Sweden is an incredibly successful, has many great accomplishments for such a small population in challenging geographical. And challenging geographical circumstances. So we've exported ABBA, Volvo, SKF, ball bearings, IKEA, Scania, exactly, all that stuff, right? And those big businesses were formed back in the early half of. Sorry,
I think he might be Norwegian or Danish. I think he might be Norwegian.
Swedish. He told me his ancestors are Swedish. He's probably your cousin.
I thought he was SEN, not SON, but we'll have to verify that later on.
Keep going.
But the welfare state, in all actuality, is very central to this conversation of why we've arrived at the point in time in Sweden in 2020 with so many failings and so many problems, and it's central to this issue. It's critical to this issue, And it was designed in the 30s, the welfare state, Dia,
Okay.
you know, as a middle way between, you know, collectivism and individualism. So the Social Democrats in that decade decided to try and find the perfect balance between individualism and collectivism.
Oh, okay.
And when I say that, what I mean by that is that they were, you know, between the 1930s and the 1970s, they tried to create this free market economy, which was characterized by, you know, competitive and limited resource allocation, otherwise known as welfare, and private ownership of the means of production and the ownership of property. So it was this combination between social, you know, I guess, you know, wealth redistribution and the capacity to make money as an individual.
But somehow you're claiming that implementation has resulted in the shittiness of Sweden today? Or are you answering my question about the Christian family, the welfare state?
The Christian family example has its origins in the establishment.
Gotcha.
And
so I was just trying to connect it. Yeah.
And the subsequent corruption of the welfare state, the corruption of the welfare state from 1973 onwards.
Okay.
But prior to that, you could have this free market economy, and it could exist with the welfare system, right? That was there for the needs of the Swedish people. So Swedish children could go to school for free and go to doctors and go to dentists and have that all paid for by the state up until the age of 18. It was a fantastic system of redistribution of successful capitalist companies like the ones we mentioned before, working to a free market economy, and the taxes from those businesses going back into the benefit of the society and the Swedish people. And that made it the envy of the world. But it was the capitalist element that made it successful from the beginning. It laid the foundations for that cradle-to-grave welfare state that I'm talking about. And but something happened in the early 70s, Dia, that corrupted this ideal and this successful formula that had been so successful for that period of time. I mean, since 1870 to 1970, that 100-year period, Sweden had the world's second highest per capita incomes, second only to Japan. Cool. So, you know, the economy was booming.
Sweden has, how do you say it in English? For some reason, I have the Spanish word in my head. The word in English for earth resource, earth is the earth. You guys are lucky that you have. What's the word? What'd you say?
Natural resources.
Yes, thank you. Oh my God.
Natural resources.
That's weird. That doesn't happen very often where the word comes into my head in Spanish and then I have to translate it in English. Yeah, naturaleza, I was going to say. Yes, Sweden is lucky in that it has that, which assists in its economy. Other countries don't have that. And so you guys, you know, you could have, even now with the worst kind of gun bust, with the worst kind of sorry, someone's written something funny on the right, with the worst kind of government you could possibly have, with these stupid feminists that think it's okay to allow rapists into their country and rape their own women. The economy will always be good there because you can't help the fact that you have natural resources. So there'll always be that veil that kind of hides the shittiness. Does that make sense? I haven't articulated myself very well, but do you know what I mean?
It's perfect. It's a perfect lead into what I wanted to say about where it went wrong in the 70s. So there was a prime minister called Olof Palme, and he got into power. He was a social democrat. He was a leftist, and you know, before the 70s, most political refugees to Sweden came from Finland or the communist Eastern Europe.
Norway or Denmark.
Oh, no, not so much, because it was mainly political refugees. So the Finns came after the war with the Russians.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And then there was Eastern European refugees there that came from, from communist Eastern Europe, from the Eastern Bloc.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, from 1975, there was a prime minister called Olof Palme, who was subsequently assassinated, the only prime minister in Swedish history to be assassinated. But he adopted state-sponsored multiculturalism. And this is a key year, 1975, okay? It's a key year. It's like the immigration reform in the US in 1965, or what you said in 1973 with Gough Whitlam, and the opening up of the open borders to Australia. So Sweden's open border year was 1975, and it adopted multiculturalism, as new immigration and minority policies. So assimilation and ethno-cultural homogeneity was abolished, and the Swedish state.
And that's when things go down.
That's exactly right. So, and that's when the Swedish state started to, I guess, allow in the cancer of open borders and mass migration from incompatible source countries. Okay, and most of these people came from the Yugoslavia, Iran, Iraq, Turkey, in that wave of that migrants. So they were the first Muslims. So Islam entered Sweden during the mid-70s for the first time.
All the Swedish drivers that drove me around in Sweden were Turkish or something. So it must have been what you just said. Yeah.
Correct. They were the first generation Muslim migrants to Sweden. And, in right through the subsequent 40 years or 45 years, unemployment rates have always been about 30 to 40% less amongst Muslim migrants than they have been amongst native Swedes. So it's been a real struggle to try and get these people integrated into the workforce. So, so this has brought us forward to this decade, or the last decade, which was really huge in Swedish contemporary history. We've had the 2015 migration from Syria,
unfortunately,
which has absolutely overwhelmed the Swedish welfare state, absolutely comprehensively overwhelmed the Swedish welfare state. But also you've got this concurrent problem of violence and crime in Sweden. You've got Islamic State recruitment, which occurred, hugely in the last couple of years. You've got bombings and car fires, hand grenades, youth gangs, no-go zones numbering in the 80s, extortion, executions that were never seen before in Swedish history prior to the arrival of these people, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the most, important things to remember is that many of these criminals there are second-generation Swedes. So they're the offspring or the grandchildren of that first wave of people from a Turkey, for example, that did work and did try and get into factory jobs and menial work like taxi drivers or working on a production line in a factory somewhere in Sweden, tried to do the right thing, right? The first group of migrants from these countries, right? Because they didn't want to go in there and cause a shitstorm and make themselves. They were more willing to try and assimilate based when they got the opportunity to go to Sweden. But the current wave of criminals are basically second and third generation, which means that despite huge amounts of support in the form of education, housing, schooling, extracurricular activities that's been given to many of these children, they still are and continue to be the main drivers of serious and organised crime in Sweden, which in many ways proves that there is a incompatibility in the long term that's happening in Sweden. And because we're looking at 800,000 people of Muslim background living in Sweden, it's a bit of a portend into how things are going to happen perhaps in Australia, where we build a link between what's happened in Sweden and what might happen in Australia.
Well, the thing is, sorry, I was gonna reiterate your point. I did a video not too long ago. It was like a mini documentary about the Bendigo faithful, and the 2-year anniversary of Bendigo, and I used Sweden as the example. And the truth is that the moment you hit over 5% of your population, your country is done for in terms of Islamic immigration, and Sweden has reached over that 5%.
Well, that's what I said before. The larger the percentage of the overall number,
Well, we're
The
under
more,
2% in this country, under 2. So we haven't reached that
well,
danger zone yet.
We're actually over 2, I believe.
We're under 2. That's what. Well, I mean, maybe we're over 2 now, but from when I made that doco, we were
I
under
see.
2.
I think the most recent census was talking about we're sitting at around about 2.6 to 2.8% in Australia. So we can still, in many ways, contain any feasible threat, any feasible, I guess, growth of Islamist-inspired problems within your own country. And France, I think, is one of those examples where
over 5, and it's destroyed. France is gone.
Well over, yeah.
Well,
I
over
think
5.
I
think the UK is over 5%.
Yeah, five. I would say is the tipping point. And I think you got the situation like in the UK. We've got so many extremists walking the streets simply because the criminal justice system can't accommodate the large numbers of people who are involved in these crimes, that you got like 60 police officers having to track one person of interest.
So
I mean, how long can that last in terms of how expensive that must be, and where you have to pull money out of other vital services to facilitate this cat and mouse game with people that shouldn't be there in the first place. And
exactly.
It really is about excessive immigration and bad integration in Sweden, in the Swedish
Very
example.
bad integration.
And it's something that we can do in Australia. We can learn from that and take an evidence and truth and reasoned approach to this particular subject, and go, well, it's just not it's just not worth running the risk of introducing this type of problem into our society in the way that we can see has happened and occurred in other countries. That's very instructive for our own immigration policy.
For sure.
I'm
just going to say, this question's been up on the screen for a while, so I want to actually finally ask it. It's from the same person, Alan B. Starred. Thank you for the $5. Okay, the Sami people are indigenous Finno-Ugric people inhabiting Sapmi, which today encompasses large northern parts of Norway and Sweden. So I think this is, maybe I could be misunderstanding his attempt at trying to debunk what you stated about them being nomadic, because it's apparently that's where they mainly reside.
Yeah, but nomadic means that they move between Norway, Sweden, and Finland there in that answer.
Yeah. So
they do move. I mean, I've lived for a couple of years in the central and northern part of Sweden and interacted with Sami groups, and and dined on the reindeer. Yeah, I mean, I was up there, and they do move from small makeshift towns right across quite a large and broad geographical area, and they really, the Sami people really are a innocuous group of people that just very much keep to themselves, and in fact have been given a large amount of help and assistance from the Swedish central government to secure their survival as a culture. So yeah, that's the way that is with the Sami people. But the Sami people don't play into this particular subject matter whatsoever.
No, I don't know why that keeps getting a mention. I don't feel like the natives, there's never been, as far as I'm aware, any information about the natives there complaining about their homeland being taken over. I feel like there's harmony there. I feel like it's fine. But to get back to another subject that's similar to what I wanted to discuss, there is a Sudanese woman, I believe she's from Sudan or Somalia. She happens to have been raised as a Muslim. Now, she left her native country to find a better country. And then upon entering Sweden, she's like, hooray, I found a great place. She started to assimilate, feeling good about herself. But then the Swedes, then the native white Swedes in her area, and then the Muslims who happen to be from the same tribe and people as her, don't let her be a non-Muslim. She's all of a sudden left this Muslim country, entered what she thought was a Western country, but she's now more confined and restricted than she was when she left. I forgot her name, but she was interviewed by Rebel Media a number of years ago. I find this ridiculous. It's like Sweden is so hell bent on capitulating to Islam and capitulating to this problem that they have, which is rape and all that kind of stuff, that they're even binding, or what's the word, confining, restricting their women, these new women who want to be Swedish, who want to be assimilated, and they don't even let them because they want to be what's it called? What's that word that you use when you're saying the virtue signaling? They're virtue signaling at a level that her life and her head and her heart and her spirit is in danger. Like, how do you react to that? What are your thoughts?
It's there's another word I think a lot of your listeners would relate to this term. It's really important. It's called cultural relativism.
Okay, yeah, I've heard it.
We've talked about it before, you and I, in private.
You and I talk a lot in private. Aya Hersiali. No, it's not Ayan Hersiali. She's not. She moved to Denmark, not Sweden. It's a different woman, similar.
She's a former parliamentarian in the Netherlands.
Yes, yeah. I know who he means, but that's not the one I'm referring to.
A very brave and inspirational lady.
Very much so.
But in regards to this lady you mentioned from Sudan, it is a
similar story to Ayan. Very similar story to Ayan.
Yeah, and it's really perfectly illustrates this term cultural relativism, a sociological term, cultural relativism, and which speaks to this bizarre standard that the left hold themselves to, in that any course of action, standard, or behaviour that we, as a Christian Western civilization, would find abhorrent, is permitted to be undertaken by a minority group based on the fact that it's permissible back in their own country. So, it's this sense that the hijab or the niqab burqa is a good example of this debate as well. In that, France institutes a burqa ban, and Denmark as well, to varying levels of success. But the argument from the left is that, well, it's permitted in their own country within their own cultural norms. Thus, we must allow it to be permitted within our own highly progressive feminist countries. And it's an example of that juxtaposition, that very confused state of mind that that one must be in order to accept that. One would think that if someone was to come like that lady from Sudan to Sweden, that it would be because they want to, she harbours a strong desire to remove herself from the old ways and embrace the new ways. That within Sweden, her community doesn't allow her to do that, because her community has been allowed to get away with standards and behaviours that we would find repugnant, but we excuse because of cultural relativism.
Yes.
And I find that to be a hugely problematic state of affairs, and from the left and centre of politics in Sweden, and probably also in Australia as well. Dia, I wanted to just say that I did some research on
Go ahead.
moving forward on the welfare state and how it facilitates some of this crime and antisocial behaviour from these migrant groups.
Okay.
Even there's an organisation called SEPO, which is the Swedish equivalent of it's like the domestic intelligence service in Sweden. It's a bit like the Swedish equivalent of ASIO.
Okay.
And even in a SEPO report, they themselves identify that that these migrant groups that are crimogenic and cannot be assimilated / integrated successfully, use state and municipal grant systems via their cultural associations to fund their lifestyle. So it's again, it's that funny, that really not funny. It's incredibly damaging and deleterious. But it's that situation where the state is almost shooting itself in the foot because it's an own goal, because you're almost you're almost paying people to not want to integrate and not assimilate and to live on the taxpayers tab and go about partaking in these criminal behaviours and criminal activities. So one wonders, it's just this incredibly it's just this astonishing situation that only a right-wing truth, reason, and evidence-based political party can purge from within Sweden and set the agenda straight and set the issue straight from the beginning, right? And probably you're probably having to try, and you're going to have to draw up new legislation that deals severely with these criminal gangs and members of those criminal gangs that are born overseas outside of Sweden for instant deportation and instant punitive punitive actions taken against them, because as long as they remain in Sweden, they will drain the system of its available resources via the welfare state, and that impinges terribly upon Swedish society, to the point where aged care homes in Sweden aren't getting resourced adequately enough.
No, that's horrible.
Yeah, I mean, ambulances are running late. Hospital wards aren't accommodating emergency arrivals, for native Swedes, and it's just you've got 10 million people in Sweden. Maybe half of those are taxpayers. How much longer can the Swedish state continue to survive under the current measures and the current situation?
Well, that was my next question. It's almost 9:30, but my next question was, sorry. Is there hope? Is there hope for Sweden, or is it too far gone? Most people say it is too far gone. I've been there, and it was fine when I went, and that was only 6 or 7 years ago. So, like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think this notion of too far gone, I find that problematic, because we are moving in the right direction in a meta-political sense.
In Sweden currently?
In Sweden, yes, in the Swedish Democrats and a couple of minor parties, Alternative for Sweden, which is like a brother party to Alternative for Deutschland, and like the National Front in France. They're gaining more and more primary votes. I think this situation can be turned around democratically and in a rational way, but the question, of course, is how much damage is going to be done in the meantime, and what the cost of the reparations of that damage are going to be. Whether that damage is done to the individual on the individual level, whether it's an individual Swede that's been in the wrong place at the wrong time, or whether it's damage done to the depleted coffers of the welfare state. How are you going to rebuild that? There is hope, certainly is hope, because the metapolitical issue is moving in the right direction. The evidence, the truth, reason, and evidence is there, and the lies and the fabrications of this feminist government, the leftist feminist government, are being exposed every day. And so Swedes, while they may not openly and overtly, openly and overtly admit to their concern and to supporting an alternative political, response, they certainly are voting with their feet, and they're voting with their votes at the poll booth, that is.
No, I knew what you meant. Does anyone have any good questions, like any legitimate questions that are not about the natives of the land? Because that's really not what we're talking about. I don't want to keep answering that. Oh, Stephen Wells! Hi! He was here last week. Whoops. That's not the one I meant to click. This one. No, it is only going to be solved with violence now. Sorry for Sweden, but that's the way it is. So Stephen Wells, in case you don't know, is my guest of last week. He's a climate change denier. Anyway, and that's his answer to.
Oh, so
what do you think? What do you think about that?
I agree with Stephen to the point that there's going to be social conflict between groups in Sweden. But I think that there is going to be social conflict. The question, of course, is how the team's going to be lined up, what teams are going to take, what the team's going to look like when that situation comes. It's of course happening at a low level at the moment, but I think what Stephen's referring to perhaps is more of a coordinated mass rebellion by the Swedish people,
like a civil war or something. I think that's what he was maybe meaning.
Yeah, I mean social conflict.
I'm just going to stand up. Keep talking. I'm just going to stand up. I need to stand up. Sorry.
Okay.
Keep going. I can hear you.
No, that's fine. Get that foam roller out. Social conflict, of course, is I think the last the very last course of action that people have. The state as it is now are of course too powerful for any one group to be able to, in a vigilante sense, try and eradicate or abolish another group. That goes for both sides of the equation, whether you're an anti-fascist Antifa or whether you're a right-wing warrior or whether you're a member of a migrant criminal gang. I mean, there's a three-way street. That there is a case for the leftist or Islamo-leftism, which is a really concerning alliance between the left, anti-fascists,
and it makes no sense because Muslims are closer to Christians in their feelings about transgenderism, homosexuality, sex before marriage. It just, I don't know.
You look at the plebiscite for that, right? So I think it's a little bit. I mean, I certainly hope that type of breakdown in law and order. Of course, we never get to that point in time, and I do believe to Stephen and to the others out there that may think that it's too late to avoid this in a rational and democratic way. I think we can do that because I've been to Sweden. I go there every couple of years, and I can tell you now that the sentiments changed, the voting intentions have changed, and certainly I think that this can be done in a not an outright peaceful way, but it can be done to the point where Swedish civilization, Scandinavian civilization, Nordic civilization can be saved and can survive in its traditional form. And I think that's the most important thing.
Well, this is unrelated, but I think we should wrap up. But because we're basically on an hour. This is very much unrelated. But are you pro-life or pro-choice? Because I think most people in my audience are pro-life, and they always like to know that, particularly Margaret.
I'm pro-life because I'm pro-responsibility.
Well done. Great answer. I love that. Well, I'm pro-life because I'm pro-responsibility.
That's right. It's individual and personal responsibility is the foundation of civilized society, and so it's that's my position on that particular topic.
No, that was good. I actually didn't expect you to answer that so quickly. That was awesome. That's the best thing I've ever heard. I'm pro-life because I'm pro-responsibility. That's so good. Look, you've made my
Hello,
Margot.
My
friend, you made her very happy.
I'm very pleased to do so. I aim to please, but no,
she's a fellow Christian.
Well, yes, and I think Christians, Christianity, like I said to you before we met tonight, Dia, is the best system for every Western civilization all over the globe. Christianity, and I've certainly returned to my local church on a regular basis. Every second Sunday, I go and partake in communion, and it's
that
because
sounds Anglican. Are you Anglican?
Yeah, well, I'm Anglican through education and Lutheran through baptism.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
But I think that it's the best. It's most certainly the best system for Western civilization, and Christendom is the best system. And I think everyone in the church that I attend and all churches agree with that wholeheartedly, and that there's no place for any alternative. There's no place for a Marxist-Leninist godless alternative or a Islamist alternative. They have their places in this world, in China, for example, or in the Middle East, in the Islamic world with the Muslim faith. I have no problem with that whatsoever. But less than 10% of the world's population, white Christian countries, doing the heavy lifting in regards to migration, regards to refugees and aid to the third world. It's just not able to. It's not going to continue. It's not going to be sustainable. And it's we have to start looking after our own people once and for all, and then you rebuild the strength of your country and your society from within. And that's where I think we're moving to in Sweden, and hopefully we can continue to do that in Australia as well.
Yeah, hang on. So they're asking about, do you have Facebook or do you have?
I have Twitter. My Twitter handle is Mr. Andersson Ratiocinate, which
I'm pretty sure I've put the link in the description box below if people want to add you, because you're definitely an intellectual powerhouse, at least on a political level. It was really random how we met.
I'm terrible at mathematics, so don't go there.
No, but I just think the way we met 2 years ago, when we just started talking about the left and Avi and Israel and Sweden and China, like we spoke about so many different things, and we're still friends. Like I just found that really interesting, and that you're finally on my show joining me. Very interesting evolution that we've gone through.
And someone's mentioned my hat. Well, it's clearly topical, right?
It's on the topic, Swedish flag.
You can't castigate my hat. My hat is on topic, I think.
I think it's absolutely. I think it's because you don't. You're a dual person, and because of that duplicity, maybe they're like, oh, he's not a true Australian nationalist. But I'm a Christian nationalist. I'm not a white nationalist. I'm not an ethno nationalist. I'm not a civic nationalist. I'm a Christian nationalist.
Oh, look, I'll certainly barrack. I'll always barrack for the Australians over the Swedes in the Davis Cup tennis. Whenever they meet, so that must qualify me.
Oh, absolutely. You were born here, man, and like your parents might be Swedish blooded, but they came here too. So it's like, I don't really know how that all works. I don't know what qualifies one as a specific Australian, but most people say, well, you have to have been here for generations.
I think they're transferable because both countries are of a common ethno-religious heritage, and both countries are in urgent need of nationalist and patriot warriors to pick up the flag, and
that's why we do what we do.
Truth, reason, and evidence against the enemies, our political enemies out there. So it's been an absolute pleasure to be on your fabulous channel tonight, I must say.
Thanks. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely, really enjoyed myself. I hope I've come across cogently. And you
have. I knew that a conversation with you would be completely intellectual. I'll tell you guys something. Sometimes when I chat on the phone to Kai, it's never a 15-minute conversation. It always goes for about an hour and a half. So I'm surprised we got it to an hour today. I'm actually very pleased. Well done. Good on you. Not to be patronizing, but well done.
It's all about being rationally persuasive, dear. And you're an up-and-coming rising star in that space. So.
Thank you. And I want to thank everyone who's been congratulating me for my segment with Gavin McInnes. Thank you, everyone, for the well wishes on that. The video will be up on my channel soon. He's told me not to put it up until he sent me the version he wants for me to put up on my channel. So eventually, my interview with Gavin McInnes will be up, just not yet. So thanks, everyone. And thank you, Kai. I'll see you around. I'm assuming. I don't know. Like we're still. You and I were supposed to work on that video together. That never happened.
Yeah, I'm running two businesses.
You got lazy. You got lazy on me. No, I'm kidding. I could probably do the research myself. I probably don't need you, but I just appreciate your smartness because you're smarter than me. So I just want the fine-tuned details there.
We'll collaborate in the next few weeks on that. Absolutely.
Thank you. That'd be great. And I'll make sure to credit you like I always do. I'm not a credit hog. I don't believe in doing that. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed the interview today. And I don't know who my guest is next week. It's either going to be what's that guy's name? Bernard Gaynor. Is that his name? Yeah. It's either going to be him or it's going to be my friend Jimothy, and we're going to talk about angels and demons and fallen angels and giants and Nephilim. So it's either going to be theological next week or political next week. So either way, you're in for something new and interesting.
Thanks to all your comments and all your followers and audience. I must thank them very much for sticking around for that full hour and a bit.
It's been good. They've been very well behaved, and I hope they enjoyed the discussion.
Wonderful. Thanks again, Dia. Have a great evening to everybody too.
You. I really appreciate it. I have to go for a walk. Like I need to walk around my neighborhood because my back is killing me. All right. I love you guys.
Good chiropractor and
I do have one. I just haven't been to him in a while. I'm going to go to him tomorrow. Hopefully he has an opening.
Okay. Thanks
Bye,
very much,
everyone.
Bye. Good night, everybody.
End broadcast.